Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about 3 disturbing real food delivery horror stories. I worked as a late-night driver to earn some extra cash, with the busiest nights being Fridays and Saturdays. On one particular Saturday night at 1 a.m., I received a delivery request to pick up McDonald's for a customer named Kyle. He lived a short distance away from my current location, and the order was straightforward, just 2 hamburgers. I followed the app's directions to reach his house, but what awaited me was anything but ordinary. The app guided me to a house on a short, dead-end street, nestled beside a line of trees running alongside a nearly deserted highway. It was an eerie hour, and I hesitated to ring the doorbell, so I decided to call Kyle instead. After one ring, the call went to voicemail, but I received a text message from him instructing me to come to the door. I obliged, reaching his front porch. As the door swung open, I was greeted by a man in his 30s, sporting a completely bald head. His baldness didn't faze me, but his breath reeked of alcohol, which was somewhat off-putting. The transaction was contactless, with payment processed through the app. However, this Kyle requested that I place the food on his kitchen table while he fetched a tip. I complied, waiting in a dimly lit kitchen illuminated only by a small, outlet-sized nightlight. The entire room emitted a nauseating odor, but I couldn't discern the source. As Kyle took an unusually long time to return with the tip, I began to explore the house. I ventured into the adjacent living room, where a dimly lit television illuminated the surroundings. The odor in this room was even more overpowering. At this point, I realized that the back door was slightly ajar, perhaps left open to alleviate the noxious stench. Curious about the source of the smell, I stepped onto the back deck. There I heard the unmistakable buzz of flies, and as a motion-sensing light flickered on, it unveiled 2 large garbage bags. Each bag concealed something long and ominous. The odor was unbearable, and I suddenly lost interest in waiting for the tip. I hastily returned inside and rushed towards the front door. Just as I was about to make my escape, I heard Kyle emerging from the basement. He was carrying a few singles as he approached me. When I feigned needing to check my car for something, he seemed momentarily distracted. This allowed me to escape temporarily. But Kyle's demeanor shifted when he noticed the back door and the porch light, still illuminated. He questioned me firmly, asking if I had been to his backyard. I denied it, and his reaction was unsettling. Without a word, he continued to stare at me. I decided I didn't care about the tip anymore, opened the door, and made a quick exit. Kyle reached out, grabbing my shoulder, but I yanked his hand away and fled to my car. As I sped away from his house, my focus was on alerting the police. I called the authorities as I drove a block away, keeping my eyes on Kyle's front door to ensure he had no time to dispose of any potential evidence. I dialed 911 and provided the operator with the necessary information about Kyle, or whoever he claimed to be, and I watched as the police cars arrived within mere minutes. I observed the scene as the police approached, guiding them to Kyle's backyard. It was then that they discovered the grim reality. Kyle had started moving the bags, which indeed contained lifeless bodies, into the bushes behind his house. Everything about this man was off-kilter, from leaving the back door open to exposing dead bodies to a pizza delivery driver, and his disturbing actions had caught up with him. I worked as a food delivery driver for a local Asian eatery, where my friend and I were the only 2 employees of Asian descent. I preferred making deliveries while my friend managed the counter and phone orders. On one memorable night, during a shift with my friend, I received a delivery request after the food was prepared. With the brown paper bag in hand, I set off on my delivery route, guided by the given address. The address led me to a secluded property with a small dirt driveway, branching off the main road. The property and house appeared run down, with no lights on, and the lawn was overgrown. As I approached, I noticed the eerie silence of the house. I decided to call my friend, who was back at the restaurant. Our boss took the phone and sternly instructed me, in a thick Asian accent, to knock on the door and not waste the food. I ventured up 3 stairs to the front door, where I encountered an oddity. There was no doorknob, just a door that slightly pushed open after a loud knock. Perplexed but determined, I stepped inside and called out hello. My voice echoed through the vacant house, but no one responded. As I waited, one of the upstairs lights switched on, catching my attention. I returned to the door, and on the first knock, it creaked open once more. There was still no one in sight, so I cautiously entered, believing they might want me to come inside. A voice replied, speaking in Spanish and instructing me to come upstairs. I ascended the staircase, only to find an arm extending over the ledge, gesturing for me to go further up. My limited Spanish skills told me that the words meant here and above. As I proceeded up the stairs, the arm disappeared into a darkened room. I didn't see the person, just the arm gesturing again. With a shiver down my spine, I refused to enter that room. I challenged the unseen figure, insisting they come out with payment or I would leave. The arm withdrew into the darkness. In response, I was struck by a severed, stiff arm, which seemed disturbingly real. I bolted down the stairs with the food, making a hasty escape in my car. I drove to the nearest neighboring house, recounted the harrowing experience to the resident, and she told me that nobody had lived in the house I'd delivered to for a year. A deep sense of dread washed over me. The woman promised to call the police, and I continued back to the restaurant. Upon my return, I reluctantly shared the bizarre encounter with my boss, who chose to dismiss it. I often wonder what might have happened if I had entered that darkened room and discovered who or what was inside. During my college years, I worked at a Domino's pizza place in Manchester Township, New Jersey. The store closed at 3 a.m. on weekends, and my boss often scheduled me for the late-night shifts, which meant finishing work in the early hours of the morning. On these shifts, there were usually 3 of us working, one to prepare pizzas, one to take orders, and one, often me, for deliveries. One Saturday night, I received a delivery order around 2:30 a.m., headed for an address that I only vaguely remembered, something like 27 Crocker Drive. I hopped into my trusty but beat-up 2002 Honda Civic and set off into the pitch-black night. The drive led me from the main road into the dark, tree-covered wilderness of the Manchester Township area. After navigating through deserted, unlit roads, I arrived at the given address, which was situated at the end of a private dirt road. As I approached, I heard a sudden bang, followed by a loss of control over my car and a strange flapping sound. My tire had gone flat. Not wanting to call my insurance company, I decided to deliver the pizza first and ask the customer for help. I reached the house, which was surrounded by thick woods. Though the lights were on inside, all the blinds were closed. I rang the doorbell, and a young man answered, seemingly ordinary. Before completing the transaction, I explained my predicament, and a look of concern washed over his face. He offered to help and headed inside to fetch some tools, assuring me that I had nothing to worry about. As I walked down the road, I noticed a spike strip but initially disregarded it. However, as I continued, suspicion gnawed at me. The thought that he might have intentionally placed the spike strip crossed my mind. Curiosity and caution drove me to return to my car without allowing him to check it. Back in my car, I prepared to leave when, in my rear-view mirror, I spotted the customer sprinting after me. Unable to escape with my flat tire, I felt the damage being inflicted on my car's wheel as I hit the spike strip. Desperate to get away, I sped off, leaving him behind. Despite the damaged tire, I drove cautiously on the one main road that cut through the area. After a long and slow drive, I returned to the Domino's. I had a duty to return the Domino's sign used for deliveries. Upon my return, I explained the bizarre encounter to my boss and a coworker, who listened in shock. My boss, while initially upset with me, eventually understood the situation. As the shift came to a close, he suggested I drive slowly home since I lived nearby, and I could address the tire issue the next day. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed by a car with its lights off. I pulled over, and the car, which had been tailing me, also stopped further down the road. Panic set in as I believed it was the same man from earlier. In my paranoia, I called the police to report the suspicious car, providing my exact location. Within minutes, a police car arrived and I explained the situation. The suspicious car, with its lights still off, pulled away and vanished into the night. The officer pursued it without a word to me. Unable to follow due to my damaged tire, I drove home as quickly as possible and parked my car in the driveway. I never found out whether the police apprehended the driver, but I always watched my back when driving home late at night. 2 months later, I quit my job at Domino's, never to look back on that nightmarish experience.